Hello there. Blake here with Around the Bend podcast. It's been quite some time since we've had our last episode. We're on episode 23 at the moment, and we have the pleasure of having John Hweee here.
Hey guys.
Um, Pleasure to have you here, John. I know that we've talked on and off over, I think, about like a year or so
Yeah,
when you're at
yeah, we've been chatting.
Duraflame and just kind of connecting through a professional network. And I just felt like, some of the chats we'd had around cybersecurity, career coaching, and really just kind of how to navigate this kind of weird job market, that we're in would probably be pretty applicable to people. So just wanted to get you on the podcast and thank you for taking the time out.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm happy
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. If you could just dive into your background a little. I mean, it's always a good thing. I think people have heard enough about me if they've watched the podcast in the
Uh,
past.
yes, so I've been in IT for quite some time here. I started young in life and decided that I wanted to be in the support role, and then I slowly grew into kind of the management role, managing both the operations side, which is my strength, and then I started doing application management and went over to Oracle for a little over a decade and a half there, managing their external properties, and then getting the opportunity to work with Akamai in the CDN space, and then started doing security there when WAF was just growing to be. And then left there and then went over to Duraflame and managed their organization. Wanted to kind of go back and say, can I manage a organization by myself, and had an opportunity to do that there. And so I'm very happy about that. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's quite a few things we've talked about over time, but you kind of had a good kind of personal, maybe like message out there for people on like cybersecurity front that you kind of wanted to put out there to the world.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I struggle with is, I fortunately I didn't get my passwords compromised, but I started life when people said, you sign on to a dozen or so sites, including your banking site, anything you did, and your social media site, and then you just said, no, let me keep the same passwords because it's a pain in the ass to manage them. And I caught my wife a couple months ago or last year. She was using we're an Apple family, so she was using Apple Notes to keep track of all our passwords. She had, like 4 or 5 of them. And I said, this is crazy. We can't do this. So I think I'd like to kind of talk about how I think, you know, Google was in years ago wanted to this, passless world. And they started to do more of that because you had the ability to integrate a bunch of your sites using Google's authentication. That didn't really scale very well because the banks weren't using it. Your social media wasn't all using that. Now Facebook has their own, and so on and so forth. So it's still a hodgepodge of things out there. So over the last last decade, I started using password management application. I wanted to try it myself to see how easy it is to use. Is it really something that I can use and sustain long term, and is it easy to use? Is it on multiple platforms? Started using a password management application when I was at Oracle because it was driving me crazy, and part of it because um, I got a nasty email note from somebody that says your password's been hacked, or it's out on the dark web, and it was on the dark web because I was able to see that people were trying to use it on there. So I use this third party RoboForm. The reason I liked RoboForm initially was because on a Windows platform, as you remember, you had a lot of desktop applications, and it was a pain because you would have different passwords, but desktop applications were there's a lot more than the web applications nowadays. I think it's 90 to 80% of everything we do is on the web, and that 10% are apps that you may have on your phone, if you will. And so anyway, so I started using RoboForm, and then I did some more research on that. It was a overseas company, and I said, hang on, I'm not going to actually subject all my passwords to them. And it was cheap. That was the reason I got it. It was cheap, and then there was two reasons I got. One was it was actually cost effective. The other one was it actually allowed you to fill in applications, right? So you log on using a VPN client, you log on with a desktop client, and it would actually be able to autofill the applications for you with your password, which I thought was really cool. I couldn't find any other applications than that. But again, that was in the mid 2010s, and then moving on to the late 2018, 19, things started really moving in the web, and so you started having Chrome, um, and Apple start using their own password management application or tool, I should say, that were part of the Google Chrome extension or the Apple. If you had an Apple ecosystem, they had their password tool, which is a little hokey, but it was better than not having one. And so I started searching around and I found a couple applications, and I settled on an application called OnePass. And one of the things we do tend to do is we have not only passwords we need to keep available, we also have other passwords, encryption keys. At work we have SSH keys. So everything that you can think of, how do you manage that, and how do you keep store of that? So I found OnePass that allowed me to do that. And obviously, working in a company, you want to be able to share your passwords. And that's the other thing, is that when you look at these password applications like Chrome, extensions from Google or Apple, you can't share passwords, right? So there's things that where you may want to say, like I've got kids, I want to help them with logging in stuff, but I don't want to have them use the same passwords for all their applications. So we have, I'm able to have share passwords with them that they can only see and I can only see theirs, and so on and so forth. OnePass does that. So I think it's important that we start more people invest in that. There's family plans that you can get on where you can share a family with your, significant other, or, if you've got kids, you can share with them on there. Again, I like that a lot because it allows you to not only keep passwords, but you may have, notes that you want that's confidential, recipes and things where you can just keep it all consolidated and share that information. And the beauty of that is that you go from one computer to the other, you're not losing that. A lot, unfortunately, with passwords on Apple, if you go to a Chrome browser, you don't have that extension. It's kind of a pain to add it. So OnePass, you still have to add it to all your browsers, or have a desktop application, or have a application on your phone, but it's a very handy tool to have. So I advocate that, and I think it's important that we all, not only at work, we advocate trying to have your IT organizations or your management look at buying a password management tool and not share passwords using a spreadsheet, a document, or a shared file on some network share you have, or some one box, or one OneDrive account, if you will. So that's one. I don't know what your comments are there. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm kind of lazy, and I have the MacBook, and I just use the Mac. I don't know, whatever, the Apple password chain, and used to use Google password chain.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like, if I'm being honest, I don't know how secure or unsecure they are. I feel like I trust Apple products just because it's ease of use, right? And I'm just used to using it, but I don't know if it's actually that great. And also, I mean, I've read some articles that like these all-in-one sign-ins they're great from a security standpoint, but they're also really dangerous, because if that initial account that you're using for everything gets compromised, then really all of your data is compromised in one place. But I'm just reading articles.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So I agree and disagree with that. I think, when you look at a master password, I think it's important to understand that master password is really important. So I have a master password for my OnePass account that's different than all my other passwords. That's totally different. And so there is some things, the beauty of that is that once you do use a password management application, you don't have to, you never create a password. Let the tool do it for you, and make all your passwords unique as much as you can. I don't, all my passwords aren't all unique because I use that tool. I would say you're on a boat like a lot of people, right? So I do feel that the password applications, the Chrome browser extensions, they're pretty secure as long as you save it on your personal computer. So if your ecosystem is just one computer, then you do have a higher level of kind of what security, because it's your computer, and they do a pretty good job of securing it. The data isn't technically encrypted if you're using an extension like Chrome, but when you're using Apple products, Apple does a really good job of encrypting the data end to end. So from that perspective, it's good. The downside to Apple is that you go from if you're not in an Apple ecosystem, or you leave the Apple ecosystem, you're like, crap, I don't know what my password is. How do I find it? What I guess. So that's the downside to it. But the upside to that is it's pretty easy to use, and so if you do have an Apple in your Apple ecosystem, I would encourage you to use their password application or password management to create different passwords. And if you have the same passwords, once you start using that tool, please change your passwords and make them all unique, especially for your, your banking. Create a different password for each of the banks that you do business with. Don't use the same password, and don't get too smart and say, let me change it to, use a different number for each bank. Don't, and just make everything the same, but change a couple of digits. Don't do that. That's just, once your passwords are compromised, it's easy for people to take that string and try to make variations that to try to break in using your account. Mm-hmm. And furthering that, when you can do multi-factor authentication, please use it. Meaning, if you can use your mobile phone as your second factor, please do that. I would encourage a lot of people to do that. I would encourage everybody to do that. There's arguments about the fact that that's still not secure. So, is it better to use a push application, another, Google Authenticator? I think both of them are. Google Authenticator, if you have the ability to do that, you can use. That's a better tool. And one of the things that's nice about OnePass and these password tools is that they integrate that into it. So you're not having to go get your phone to get that second password. So that's one of the beauties of having a password management application, is that you can actually use that. There's also extensions that allow you to do that, but I wouldn't trust those, because the problem with that is that once your browser, something happens to your browser, now you're kind of screwed, because you've kind of lost that connection. And if you're using it at work, or your computer, something happens to your computer, and it's not always easy. So I encourage you, if you have an Apple ecosystem, please use that. That is more secure than not having one. You're using the browser, that's better than not having a password management application. Please don't try to use the same password for all your tools.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of like good general information for people to have, because like I think the data is like 98 or 99% of all cybersecurity breaches are really just password problems and people clicking on that link you shouldn't click, you get in your email, and that's...
Yeah, I think that the other thing, kind of continuing that on there, is that, can I do a screen share?
Yeah, of course. I believe you can.
So I want to actually talk about two quick things, and I think it's important to talk about these two. So I want to present two things that are phishing attempts, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
On there, I'm going to pull up two phishing two types of phishing emails. So the first one I'm going to do is, let me share here real quick. I know if you're watching YouTube, you can see it. If you're listening, you won't be able to see it, but I'll try to articulate that here. Where's the button to share? Oh no, where's the share button? Here it is. Okay. So I'm gonna share my screen, my whole screen. It's a little easier to do that. Oh no, okay, I can do it this way. I'll just do the entire screen for now. Okay. So here, this is a phishing attempt, right? So I dug this out. I get a handful of these every couple of days or weeks, I should say. So here's a good example, right? So like, would you respond to this if you got this in your email? I mean, in your text message?
I would mark it as spam.
Yeah. So exactly. So just a reminder, this is pretty trivial, right? Like, oh, that's easy, just click just delete it. Don't respond. Don't give them the time of the day, right? So this is one. The other one I want to show off is this here. I couldn't find a more recent one, but this one, what I want to tell people to do is, when you get an email, it's a lot harder to do on an iPhone because they obfuscate your email address. But you can see here, if you look at this on a browser, in your email browser, you get the whole context. If you use a phone or an app on your phone, you don't get the whole context of this, right? So you can see here, I got this email. Would you have clicked on this link?
So this is a good... I've gotten very, like, not for Xfinity, but other services where I'm like, it says that I'm overdue or my service is suspended. But if I know that my service is fine on I'll trigger in my brain, and I always pay my bills, right? So I'm like, this is already like, when people try and activate your fear mode, I'm like, something's up. So my second, I don't want to take your thunder, but my second thing I do is when I'm like, well, like sometimes I'm like, did I not update my credit card or something like that? Let me check the sender address is my second.
Exactly. That's a big giveaway. So they can't obfuscate this. They can't, because they can't obfuscate where it's being sent from. So it's important when you get an email. It's much harder to do when you're using a phone, your phone app on there. Even Outlook, if you use Outlook or if you use the browser, it'll give you the actual from address. So you can see here clearly, this is not an Xfinity email, right? It's not. So don't give this a time of day. Now, the other giveaway is that so before you click on a link, I always try to ask people when, they know it's not real, hover over, you can't really do that on a phone, but if you hover over this, look on the bottom here. So they stopped doing this. So this is a bad example, but this is a good example just to tell people, you see here what they did, right? So they use this URL on the bottom. You can see this URL on the bottom here. I can't highlight it because I can't move my mouse, but you can see what it says there, right? So in this specific example here, what this person is doing, this phishing email is doing, is they're using a redirect service, and sometimes what they'll also will do is that they'll use a short URL from Amazon, from tiny URL that actually gives you what looks like a decent URL, but it has nothing. It'll take you to some site that looks like their site, but it's not really their site. They do a pretty good job of that, right? So I will never click on a link where it's actually using some URL. So in this case, this is an Xfinity email, but the URL is coming from, it's asking me to go to Yahoo. So what this is doing is a redirect service, and I'll click on it because Yahoo found this site, and they've actually stopped allowing you to do that. So they now give you an email like this. I mean, a message like this. So what was working was it was actually allowing you to redirect this URL to another site on there, which was a bad site. But again, you got scammed on the first click because, oh, it's Yahoo, so I should click on it. But again, just be cognizant that they're using URLs that look very similar. But why would you go to Yahoo to go over to Xfinity? It should take you directly to that.
Yeah.
Again, some things that I highly recommend. Try to keep an eye on that when you do it. So if you got a suspicious email, a phishing email, it looks like a phishing email, use a computer, a desktop computer, or where you can hover over the links and look at it, or like you said. I mean, the easiest thing to do here is just look at where it came from.
Yeah.
Right. It's very unlikely that if it really came from Xfinity, it would have a Comcast or Xfinity.com, and they can't. The only people that can send emails from that company is from their domain. Excuse me, is going to be from their domain. They can't. They can see they couldn't have done it. Now, obviously, they could have misspelled Xfinity as well. So keep a close eye on that. Make sure that domain is spelled the same as the company name, if you will.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Anything that's like fear based typically is like deadline based. You have to do something by this time. Your service is overdue. I mean, I kind of like joke around. I'm like, well, I mean, kind of serious, kind of not. I'm like, well, I'll know if my service is actually suspended if I can't watch TV or if my internet stops working. And until then, I'm all good because
Yeah,
my
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So
seems like
you're
my
right. The fear factor is always a clue, right? Because if you pay your bill, even if you think you haven't paid a bill, look, just double check. Double check yourself.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's actually a really good example, and I think that's something like visually we see every day, and like having somebody with like your IT background and cybersecurity experience, it actually is a very good, just kind of like reminder. And it's funny because we get reminded about this stuff all the time. You're like, oh yeah, whatever. But then I think that Xfinity one was a good example of like, well, that's a little bit more sophisticated, and I know
Yeah,
people that have
exactly.
they're like, oh, well, I clicked on this thing and I had to reset all my stuff and I had
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
do those things. But no, I
And
mean,
I
that's
have
a,
a couple other things on the kind of cybersecurity front of the house. So that's the second of the two, and I can't seem to get my email up, my notes up. It's not here. That's fine. The other thing, just one quick note going back on two-factor authentication. I mean, going back on passwords. So, it is true, and one could argue that, John, I don't care if you get my password because all my sites have two-factor enabled. So yeah, please enable two-factor. That is very true. You can technically use, the same password where you have two-factor enabled on all these sites. But the thing that it was interesting is, I'll give you a funny story. Working at Duraflame, we had we had a pretty senior person get phishing email. They clicked on the phishing email, and what they did was they built a Microsoft login site. So what they did was that they actually siphoned his username and password, and guess what they did also? When he clicked on his authentication approval on his phone, on his push notification, that allowed that same session he had to be taken over, and the person actually took over his account using the authentication. So so it's easy to do, I get it. But so what I warn people about, that I forgot that one note, is that make sure, you know, when you get, it's not, it is doable. You can get your SMS messages to be kind of duplicated, and people can get out, but it's a lot harder to do. But one thing that's easy to do is, if you look at your push notifications, right, you get on the phone, like you're in a hurry, like, oh crap, I think I asked for that. So you inadvertently click it thinking, well, that makes sense, I should have. So what they'll do is, a lot of times, well, a good portion of the time, when you're asking for that authentication, that last two-factor where it's a push notification, where you got to go physically on your phone and hit on your app and do approve, before you hit that approve, check where it's coming from. So the guy wasn't paying attention, and it was coming from New York. He was actually in California. So does that make sense? So it's all these applications know where you're based, right? Because when you get that ping, they'll say you're based in California, near where you are. So if you get a ping from outside of where you physically, don't click on it, ignore it, deny it. So now they may have had your password, but they can't get that second factor, so it's failed, right? When you get that, the first thing you should do is reset your password at that point, because at that point, it's safe. And then, most applications now, including your banking, you can go see who's logged in, and if the people are logged in, you can force things to be logged off.
Here's a weird one. So like I used to work at Verizon, and even sometimes now, like when I know that I'm authenticating my own Apple device, a lot of times Apple will show, because they don't show your actual location. For some reason it redirects to Chicago a lot of times. So I remember I'd have customers and they're like, "Well, I'm not in Chicago," but it was like right as we were doing that process. Like with Apple specifically, I know what you're talking about on Microsoft Authenticator, but on Apple specifically, I've noticed like I've denied myself a lot of times because it's showing me like in another place. Like why does that happen?
They've gotten better with that. I think, location, even when we sign on here, they're using location to kind of figure out where you are, right? So the location services are getting better. That's really the issue, is that the location services used to not be as precise, and it's gotten a lot better. So, if you don't, that's a good question, it's a good point. If you don't think that's you, I'd rather have you deny it and then try again, and then say, oh, that is me. Because the second time you've done, it's you, right? Crap. It says, I'm in Chicago, but I'm not. But I'm going to use a service. I got to hit OK, or else I'm going to be sitting here doing nothing, right? Kind of thing. So from that purpose, for that, that it's you, and it looks legitimate, like it's. But Apple has gotten better. I've seen that before. They've gotten much better. And when that happens, I encourage you to also take a picture of that and then send it to Apple and say, hey, what's happening there? Because it may not just be you, right? It may be other people that are getting it. So yeah, be more cautious than that. So
That's a
um,
good point.
the,
Yeah.
the last thing I think in the cybersecurity space I like to talk about is that you said something that's important. So I don't know how old your Mac is, but what Apple has done finally is that if you so the next topic is hard drive encryption. It used to be a pain in the butt, and if you have an older computer, I can't help you. But on all new computers you buy, Apple included and Windows computer included, they all have encryption ability. So it's not hard to turn on. Apple actually took the if you I did this right before this call. I'm gonna have to let me share again to show and tell here. But Apple actually, believe it or not, I I thought so because I was messing with an Apple some time ago. So here's So if you have a newer Apple Silicon,
Uh-huh.
as you read here, by default, they have encryption enabled on the hard drive. That's important because if your hard drives get shipped, if your hard drive gets stolen, right? As long as they don't have your password, it's very unlikely that they'll actually be able to do anything with the computer for a couple reasons, right? Because there's location service enabled on a Mac. But the other thing that they could do is they could technically figure out how to get your hard drive out of there and remove that hard drive. It's a lot harder to do on a Mac because a Mac hard drives are soldered in. But on a PC, unfortunately, most computers we buy don't have soldered hard drives in them because it's more cost effective for a Windows user to do that. So on a Windows machine, I have encryption enabled not only on my USB drives, but also on my hard drive itself. Windows has gotten much better at being able to enable, and it's called BitLocker
Oh, okay.
on Windows. So it's easy to enable on here,
Mhm.
and I highly recommend that you do that. Now, the only caution in this is that if you do this, please use some password application to store the encryption information on there, right? So I won't show it to you, but I'll tell you that it's easy to do. If you just go to your, I guess what I'll do is I have it enabled on my computer here, so let me share again my whole desktop here. And yeah, I say it's easy, but obviously I work in this world, so but it's not on a Mac. I don't have a Mac with me, but it's easy to do on a Mac. So here, if you just type BitLocker,
Mhm.
it pulls that up, and that's it. So it's easy as this. I have it enabled here. I won't show it to you because I don't want to, since it's being recorded.
Yeah.
When I do backup recovery, I can save that off to, print it out on a piece of paper. I don't recommend you print it out. I do recommend that you save it as a PDF and then store that PDF somewhere that's secure. Now, the problem with that is, where do you store it securely? So that's why, again, having a password application is pretty critical. So you could technically, if you have it on there, is figure out how to store it. Well, there's no easy way to store that securely. So what I do is I have an encrypted uh, um, drive and I save it on that. So there's a couple of ways doing it, but it does take a little bit more effort. Security is not free, and I know it's a little bit more work, but at the end of the day, I think it's important that people take these take additional things to do it. I think Microsoft and Apple and others have done a much better job of making it easier. It's not easy, but it's easier, if you will, than it used to be, if you will. So here, I've encrypted my hard drive. So what will happen now is if my computer gets stolen, they can't use any data on my hard drive. And that goes back to your question. Well, how secure is saving all my passwords on Google Chrome? Well, it's stored locally. So if you encrypt your hard drive, they get a hold of your hard drive, all your passwords are secure because it can't do anything with your hard drive until they decrypt it, right? Because it's encrypted. So that's one. The other is you have a Mac, right? So I do encourage people to use the Hello on a PC, on a Windows platform, that is, right? On
Mhm.
here. So it's pretty easy to turn on. It doesn't come on by default, but you come here, go to account. You can also, there's plenty of YouTube videos on here. And then you can go to, I'm sorry, personalized, no, it's not up there, down here. So I haven't enabled. I do encourage people to use the Hello. There's been a couple articles written by Microsoft that
Mhm.
even using a PIN is as secure as using a password. And I encourage people to do that because if you use a PIN, it's easier for you to type in a PIN than the whole password all the time. Because then what do you do when you have to type in a long password? You just don't, right? So you create a password that's 8 digits, right? So think about your phone, right? Nowadays, everybody has a 6 or 8 digit PIN on their phone. So don't use the same PIN, but use a different PIN that you can remember. But that allows you to now have a pretty strong password. You do have to, remember it, but you don't have to type it in every time, right? You just type in the PIN. So on my computer, I also have my webcam is also a Hello cam, and it allows me to do that. On a Mac, you have the fingerprint option. So again, those are the things I wanted to cover today. A lot I said about cybersecurity stuff, so hopefully that's helps people. And if you want more information, there's definitely plenty of resources available online that you can Google on or watch a YouTube video on this kind of stuff. It's pretty easy to do.
Well, yeah, and it's actually a lot more important than people think. It's not just like, oh, did I get this account logged into or somebody charged $20 to my bank account? I mean, executive cyber attacks are like really how
Yeah.
people get to organizations, like going straight for the CEO, CFO. Their accounts are like, or even controllers, things like that. Like that's how people really get to organizations, is to compromise people that are in charge of finances, people in charge of operations. Because once you
So true.
have anybody that's in charge of transactions, I know
I
that I
know.
used to work for a car dealership.
Social networking is not hard to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have a what do you call it? I used to work for a car dealership, and we got a really weird email from like the owner, and he was like, "Hey, I'm in a meeting. Wire me,
Oh,
15,000 to this
yeah.
bank because I'm buying this car. Because we would buy cars through the auction a lot, and we'd have to
Okay,
send
that makes
money.
sense.
So I was like, this is. But we both stopped and were like, this is weird. Let's call. I'd rather wait and call and make sure. And of course, ended up being not true, but it was like they had read the email. And this was like 8 years ago,
Yeah,
10 years
okay.
ago. They'd read the emails, they'd seen the way that he talked, how that they requested stuff. So it was like, even back then, if someone was thoughtful about it, they could kind of get you to that point. But until you can call somebody on the phone or talk to somebody face to face, be like, is this actually what we need to be doing? Okay, great.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's actually a very important piece. I think we lose that aspect of it, right? I mean, you can be I can be the busiest guy, I can be, in a hurry, but, before you make that transaction, hit that send button, on making that, call, there's no reason anybody should be upset at you when they say, hey, did you really, just want to double check, right? Because I'm sending $1 million, I'm sending, $10, whether it's a million or 10, it shouldn't really matter. My point is, you should double check, have an oral conversation with the person, to walk up to the, if it's that important, right? If it was that important, I don't, you're in a meeting, you're not going to just, sit in the meeting and finish your meeting and ask me to send you some money, right? You're going to come out there and say, make sure I got the money. Yeah, there's been a lot of scams. So you're right. Good point. It's,
it's
another.
yeah, it's kind of funny too because like these things just kind of seem to keep coming back again and again and again and again and again, and they've been around for forever. But it's like kind of this never-ending battle. It feels like, as long as we have people working on computers.
Yeah, no, it's true, true.
Yeah.
And, I love to cover more of this stuff. I think it's important. So maybe that's a good taste and see what kind of feedback you get. I'm happy to spend some more time in kind of showing off one pass and how I use it. I think again that's a really important piece, and I think we've um, password management tool out there. I think Apple is evolving that. So if there's more, people want more information, just hit you up, and then happy to get another podcast with you, and we can spend a good amount of time focusing specifically on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's always time to do more videos, more informational stuff. I think it's helpful for people, but it's also the reason I like doing this stuff is I get folks with your experience, or, giving people a taste of like what I'm seeing out there in the world, and people, I got feedback again and again. I should bring back the podcast. I should talk to people again. It's helpful because people are all in their silos, especially working in their individual companies, and like sometimes we lose context, or we lose like, hey, what are other people doing in my same kind of field, or like what's kind of going on there. Like we just see what's posted on like LinkedIn news, or whatever news source you use, and it can be kind of hard to say like, hey, what's legit and what's not legit, and what's like happening out there in the world. So I hope that, yeah, things like what you did now kind of give people some more exposure and visibility into things. And I know that you'd just like kind of another topic you'd brought up to me multiple times was like, hey, in your own job search in the past, you'd been hit up by all these professional development people, and I think they're like job seeking coaches and things like that. Um, and it's funny because I've had a lot of people bring that up, and people have always like, oh, what's your take on it? And it's like, I think for a job search, the best person to help you in a job search is a good recruiter because they're talking to actual clients that are willing to basically pay money. Like, as a recruiter, your job is a company has a problem filling a role or doesn't have the internal skill set to identify candidates out there in the market, even with all the tools we have. Because I feel like AI is ironically bringing things back to the old school because there's so much BS being shoved into people's applicant tracking systems, into their inboxes, into so many places. Even I don't know if you've been following this. There's like this kid from Colombia that
Oh yeah,
created.
yeah.
Yeah,
Before you got to it, it was actually I've been spending a lot of time listening to podcasts. Yeah, it's a very funny story. The kid that got kicked out of Columbia, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
and
he was
got his
a second
offer
year
from
student. He wrote his
Google.
own application for coding, right? I have it actually. I have it listed. There's a
Yeah,
couple of coding tools
interview
out there.
coder, I think, and his what do you call it? I have a guy in my network that I know very well that I'm working with right now. I've known him for years, and one of the problems he is having because he's posting up, he's hiring for like an AI ML engineer. There's just so many. He's like, somebody looks great on the resume, their LinkedIn looks great, but he's like, when I'm talking to them, the answers they're giving me are like too polished. And he's like, I'll do a one-on-one coding test with them, it's just too good. He's like, I can't put my finger on it, but he's like, I just know that, like, he's like, because he's been a software engineering manager for like 10 plus years and done it hands on. He's like, it's just too perfect. Like, nobody's that perfect. And I can tell when I'm just kind of being given a chat GPT answer to a question. And he's like, I'll try and like specifically like point them, like, tell me about this project. Tell me this detail about like he'll keep pushing for more details, and he can tell they're using tools to answer the questions because the tool doesn't know what they actually did, and then it's trying to make up parts of a project that they never did, or maybe like they only did a little bit of a project so they can't speak in an in-depth knowledge about it. So there's a way to like shove people during an interview, not physically and not like being aggressive, but like there's times where it becomes very apparent to me when I'm talking to somebody where I'm like, yeah, you're not going to talk to my client because I can tell you're trying to game the system right now. And that's what's happening. So it's kind of funny because of all the things we're talking about. I feel like coming back to these job search people, if someone was willing to give you a guarantee, like, oh, I pay you whatever that amount of money they're asking for, 500, 1,000, 2,000, $5,000, and if I don't get a job, I 100% get all my money back. None of them will agree to that.
Yeah, no, that's I mean that's a very that's the concern I had is there's no it'd be great to work on a retainer basis on there, but they won't do it, right? Because they can't guarantee. They're just yeah, you're right. That's yeah, that's it's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
The, on the flip side, I do think there's a lot of value in career coaches, and even I talked to one once in the past, and I'd be willing to recommend people to folks in my network that I know are like legitimate career coaches that give you kind of like better. They'll point you in the right direction, but essentially, it's like a career therapist maybe, where you're like, hey, I don't really know what I want to do professionally. These are the skills I have. These are the things I've done. Or this is the professional dilemma I'm faced with. And there's not good people in your own network or good people in your personal network that can help you because maybe you're in a really weird, specific scenario. It is helpful to get connected with people that can be like a professional um, career therapist in that sense. Like, if you're, maybe it's not like an ethical dilemma, maybe it's not a legal dilemma, but like, hey, I'm trying to get this promotion and I work at a company of this size and I'm dealing with these politics and I'm dealing with these maybe like engineering problems and I'm considering leaving or I'm considering moving up. Help me kind of deep dive into this because you can't really put that on your family members all the time, right? It's even like your significant other because like they just might not really not like they don't understand you, but like they're like don't understand all the specificities of everything. Like, my girlfriend, she's a CPA, so I don't understand accounting to that depth. So like some of the problems, I'm like, oh, well, that seems kind of confusing, or I can help from an emotional standpoint, but I can't really help from like some of the finer points, and vice versa, right? She's never done like recruiting or dealt with like tech sales and things like that, and engineers. So it can be helpful, and I think especially most of those folks will charge you a couple $100s for like a couple sessions. If that helps put your life in a better direction, then I think that's valuable. Just like if you're not feeling well, you go to a therapist like for emotional things that you kind of need like some guidance on. I mean, it's kind of the same concept in a lot of ways, and I think that can be valuable, but I like finding good recruiters will give you a lot of free information as well, like what should I be getting paid? Really, what should I be doing to get into the next round of interviews? What roles should I be looking for? Those kind of things. And sometimes people don't like talking with recruiters because, to be honest, I'm like, I work in the industry. I've worked in this industry for over 3 years, and like, there's some really dumpy recruiters that are just not great. They're not super helpful. They're not super professional. They're just like very transactional. And then there's other people that like actually look at it as like a career, and they're going to be there for a long time. Kind of like a real estate agent. I would make that analysis, or like a really good insurance agent, maybe. Like the people that have done it a long time, they have a lot of information. They're not really going anywhere. So they're more consultative, like, hey, this is what I see. This is where you're at. This is where you should go to. Or if you're like when I did my last job search, I partnered with a couple of recruiters, and I was like, I knew somebody that was hiring in this geographic region. I knew somebody that was hiring for these specific like software sales roles. I knew somebody that was hiring for like these recruiting sales roles, and I was kind of like going in all these buckets and talking with different people. And they kind of just told me like straight, like, hey, this is kind of what it is. And then that kind of helped steer me, because I was falling into the same trap a lot of people were. Like, you apply to all these places and you're just not getting traction, and you're getting frustrated, and it's like the market's kind of tough in the San Francisco Bay Area. I know that people across the country might watch this, but like the local hiring market where John and I live is kind of tough, and has been tough for the past 2 years, like across all fields. It's not just like just IT or just sales. I mean, I think the only exception are people that work in the medical field. That
Yeah,
seems to be
in the
hiring.
medical field, yeah, it's good and bad. I think it's good but then yeah, it's ironic, I think.
It's a double-edged sword, yeah, because they're so understaffed that like there's not enough of these medical folks doing the right stuff they need. And then accountants, nobody wants to be an accountant either, which I've learned from my girlfriend. We were looking at the different roles for like tax managers, and it was like just dead empty. All the
Mm,
ATSs, no one was applying to those roles. So I was like, that's a very good and a very bad sign at the same time.
yeah, no,
Kind of
that's
like the
true.
medical stuff. You're like, well, wonder what's going. There's a reason for everything, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
I'll give you some of my personal experience on this, and I'll tell you it's an interesting issue that I bring it up because I wanted to get some of your feedback. But so I had a coach. I'm kind of mid-level still today, and I like to get to that next level. And the problem that I have with that is that I don't have the funds just to go out there and spend the fund. And like you said, the big issue, quite honestly, is that I'm willing to put some effort and money into to this process, but what's the outcome? What can they guarantee me? And the only thing, like you said, is that if there's no guarantee at the end, I'm less hesitant to do something about it. So I spent a couple of sessions, just quick sessions with this guy, and then I googled online, and unfortunately your price is much lower. So the average price for kind of executive management coaching, kind of mid-level to try to get you that next level, is between 50 to 10,000 a year for a set, for that track, if you will. So it's not, it's not the easy. I wouldn't mind doing what you said. I don't mind paying, somebody that's a coach for, a couple of sessions under $1,000, because that seems like a good return, right? But again, the issue, like you said, is there's no return. They can't
Yeah.
guarantee you return. They can only tell you, I can coach you, but they're not in the room with you to get you your next gig, right? So unless I think the package should include where they're not only coaching you, but they're saying, I'm going to get you into this organization or this, next area. So what I ended up doing was I was like, I searched a couple of things and looked around, and I tell you, it's not cheap. There's nationwide companies that do that. And I kind of agree with you when when you said it's not, I don't think the benefits are quite there. So what I did was I actually spent some time going on YouTube and just looking at, there's a couple of free ones to try to get you in the door, right? So there's, these coaches, these executive coaches per se, that try to get you into their program by giving you a taste of it. And then there's one girl that has written books and things about it. So I think it's useful to a certain degree, but like you said, I think the model has to change in today's economy, where there's got to be an outcome base, right? So there should be where, either a company helps you and, say, okay, you work for company X, you go find a coach, executive coach, that the company's paying for that to get you to the next level, because it's cheaper for them to coach you to get to that next level than it is to hire somebody at the next level, because, trying to get somebody there isn't a guarantee. And it also shows you loyalty, right? I mean, in today's world, what kind of sucks is that there is no, the word loyalty for a company, there is none. There is
Yeah.
absolutely none. It's more about the bottom line, right? Is if you don't, make the bottom line and you're not productive, it doesn't matter, how good of a person you are or how tied, how well you've done. It's just, none of that matters, if you will.
In some industries, I do. That it still does happen though, and like my grandfather used to be, he would have probably been the equivalent of like the CTO for IBM back in like the late '60s, and like they used to just invest heavily in all their people. Like if you started with a company and
Mm-hmm.
you needed to get like an advanced degree, or if you were like a tech and they wanted you to be like in a full engineer, they would pay for you to go to school while you're working to upgrade you to that next level. When you do that for people, you get a much different level of loyalty. And
Exactly.
I think there's definitely value in that, and that people, like companies that are willing to do that, because that still happens, and like you'll still see that happen in like construction or specialized like civil engineering. Like they'll take the time out and like actually invest into people and invest in their education, and like kind of like more what you're saying, like they're not as apt to just fire people willy-nilly. And definitely in most IT organizations, with the exception of actually, I would say like some MSPs I've dealt with are actually very, very good with how they like train and bring up their people. But there's a lot of companies now that, yeah, they couldn't care less. I mean, I know just this week, several people in my network, they've been dealing with different rifts, like not themselves personally, but it's just like
Yeah.
one after the other, and it feels like kind of like what you're saying on this training and other stuff. You're kind of left doing a lot of this on your own. And what I try and tell people about like upgrading your skill set, where you really want to be, it's kind of like important to know what are you doing, why are you doing it, and where do you actually want to be. Because sometimes we just like have these skills, we go to college, we're in a certain career path, and we're just kind of like going through it, and then the economy kind of goes down,
You
right?
look around and you're like, well, what do I have to offer? And you don't have much to offer because you focus so much on, one track, and you forget about, how do you get yourself more involved. And I think companies do well. I shouldn't say. I think individuals, we need to do more of that. And I think I've learned that, and I knew that, a couple of decades ago before I got an Oracle, but I got kind of stagnant there, and then I lost touch of, my network, and the old days, your networking was you went to actually, after hours drinking. you
Yeah.
but nowadays it's, your social networking is your social networking, right? You get online and you spend hours on LinkedIn, or you spend hours trying to figure out how to network with people on various social networking platforms.
It's true, and I'm personally, and a couple other people in my network that are more technical, trying to go to like back to like in-person events. Like in IT, there's Help Desk Institute is one. There's Bay Area IT Bait, they call it.
Mm.
Um, I know that for security, there's like the CISSP
Yeah, the
Institute.
local chapters. Yeah.
Yeah, the local chapters. I know there's the IS Information Security, ISC squared.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of those. Yeah, you're right. I went to one last week as well, and I mean, all those are good, but the hard part again is how do you network out there? How do you get yourself out there? The other interesting thing, I know there's people out there that may be hopefully watching this because they're out of a job and been out for months or possibly even a year. I say to those people, stay on track. I mean, it's hard, and I'm in the same camp thinking that it's never going to end. Stay on track, and I think what's important is I wish recruiters did more like you do to reach out to us. Just say hi. It's just having that dialogue, and I think it's also important in having these kind of conversations where you're at least doing something you feel productive about, right? Get in the swing. Don't feel so down. And then I feel, and I get you guys. And the job market's where it is. I wish it was better, but as you know, it's there's more candidates out there than you can fill, right? On there versus there was more positions than the candidates. There used to be that, I remember. And that was like, well, I can get any job, but then you say, well, I don't really want that job because I can probably get in there, but I won't be very successful. So it's an interesting,
Mhm.
environment in today's world. So, yeah, anyways, yeah, you're right. These, um, and I wish there was, I don't know how you can get more involved in those because LinkedIn has so much stuff in it that you're overwhelmed on there. Um, so how do you stay on top? I noticed you've been doing a lot of posting on things, and you created a bunch of pictures for a spring cleaning. That's pretty cool. You spent some time doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I what I've been trying to do, because just like zooming out of just IT and maybe just recruiting, like part of your value, not only for your own personal branding, no matter what field you're in, but it can directly affect like your success, your access to jobs, your exposure, like in your greater kind of industry, is like, what do people know about you? What kind of content do you put out? What do people want to know you as? And so that's something I've been working on. Like I used to do this podcast and I let it, like I kind of got lazy and I let it go, and I wasn't really putting as much out on social media as I should, and I was putting my nose to the grind, and I was like, I'm just tired. I feel beaten down. Like there's a lot going on. The market's been down. And then I was like, you know what? Whatever the market's doing, whatever's going on, like I have my own personal brand, and the people that work with me, like both in my job and the people in my normal life, they like me for the way I am, right? And the certain things that I bring to the table, and I'm going to have a different flavor and a different appeal than everyone else doing the same exact job that I do. So part of it is me like bringing the knowledge and like having a way for people to connect with what I do, connect with different people in my network that have really good knowledge that I see as valuable, and hopefully they see as valuable too. Um, and I guess just make it all a little bit more human, right? Because like you mentioned, going on LinkedIn, being overwhelmed, and there's just so much, like just crap, like so much stuff everywhere. Like I'll doom scroll LinkedIn because
Yeah, I
I'm
know. I try to. After a minute, I just stopped because you're right. You just sit there and doom scroll all day.
yeah, and then I'm like, okay, bad, don't do that, Blake. Like I'm like, okay, turn it off. And I don't use Instagram or Facebook anymore. Personally, it's like made my life way better. So I was like, okay, I'll just limit my social media consumption to LinkedIn. But now you can't even get away. Like now people are posting all kinds of crazy stuff on there. I'm like, I thought I could just read random IT and data engineering posts, and I was like, guess not. Guess here's some weird LinkedIn clickbait, that I'm stuck on. So what I try to do is like I'll kind of like put stuff out there and like go away. Like I people try and argue with me on my posts sometimes or things that I say, and I'm just like, no, like I just kind of like, or I kept getting invited to be like one of those LinkedIn voices. and then I'd post stuff, and then people just start like kind of talking shit in the comment thread, and I was like, or just saying, yeah, I don't think that's true. I'm like, why am I being asked to be a LinkedIn voice if people are just dunking on me? I'm like, I don't really want to have like some Socrates style debate on my comment threads on LinkedIn voices. So it's kind of funny too. And then there, because this, I could break this down into a whole nother topic, but there's also people that I know in my network that they're just like they're LinkedIn top influencer or top voices, but I don't actually think they're the most intelligent people in their respective field at times, not to like harsh on people or be disrespectful,
I
but
see what
it's
you're
like
saying. I hear you.
the
The
problem is
content, yeah, they're just throwing content out there to throw content out there, and that's just not right. And then people figure that out, and then all of a sudden, nobody's reading their
well,
stuff.
that's the other problem is because social media and really the algorithm like determines what we see and don't see. That if you're the reason I was going down this path is if you don't put things out there that are genuine about yourself, and whether that's in person networking, whether that's LinkedIn networking, I would suggest, even if you're not doing sales or anything, just connect with people that are in your respective industry, connect with recruiters at companies in your respective industry that you would want to work at proactively. Like, even if you have a full time job, just do it.
I
Just
agree.
spend
Yeah, I agree.
10
Yeah.
minutes a week, 10 minutes a month, and it can really pay off, down the road.
Yeah, no,
And that's
it's so true, and I think I don't know how much more time, but I think the wrap up would be, yeah, I think it's really important. I think of all the platforms, I do feel strongly that LinkedIn is actually not bad. It's pretty focused on there. You don't just have people out there, but I do get like the thing that drives me a little batty. I think you may have mentioned this to me is that LinkedIn is heavily used by salespeople. There's a high percentage of people that go there, and I
aware.
get all sorts of crap from there. And it drives me a little crazy. But then I'm like, okay, well, maybe if I use this tool in the future, there's going to be different ties in that will get me where I want. Or, like one of these days, I'm looking for an opportunity at the company they went over to. They'll remember me. But it's just crazy. I mean, I get, people from outside of the U.S. wanting to connect with me. I'm like, well, that's fine, but I'm not sure how I'm going to help you, but okay. Or you get a sales guy. Do you have 15 minutes that we can hear more about you? I said, well, no, that's not really anyways. But yeah, you're right. So yeah,
I'm in the same boat, and I try to like make my, because I'm in sales, right? I'm in sales recruiting, so I do recruiting, and I like try and get the services of my company and like my little team in the Bay Area out. Um, and so what I try to do is like make it natural, right? So if I just send those requests out, and if someone matches with me, then I'm like, okay, cool. I'm gonna reach out to you, and usually that's because it's all based on like acceptance, right? And like, do people want to engage? If they want to engage, cool. Then I kind of like take that further down. But I get hit up with so many weird roles and people trying to sell stuff to me, and like people that I can tell are not even reading what I do and trying to sell stuff to me.
yeah,
Like,
that's fair.
yeah, I'm not really on any kind of like timetable here either. So like, it's not like I have to.
The one of the other things I've been trying to figure this out is these ATSs don't seem to do really well, I think, in being able to get you in front of recruiters. And I was talking to another recruiter yesterday. So you're about 6 people in before you even get a discussion with with the hiring manager, and possibly you know the AI systems have taken. I'm trying to figure out like how can these recruiting tools figure out maybe what we're doing today is a very useful tool, right? Because sometimes a resume will never do the due justice of how well you can talk, how well you can interact, and I don't know how do you I think in today's technology, I think there's got to be a better tool than the ATSs, because those I think are, and I'm trying to give some perspective of people out there that's been looking for days, for years, for months, and possibly years. I mean, I think you get turned off by that because you one recruiter says, you should write a resume for and personalize it to that job. I'm like, dude, if you're doing that every day, then yeah, that's fair. But then you're like, well, at what point are you just reading a resume just to, and I kind of agree. You want to be a movie trailer, but at a certain point, you can't make a movie trailer because you're trying to get in your foot in the door. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how do you, what are tools we can do that are, when we do have a pretty good skill set and we want
Yeah.
to show that off? Is it, having a pocket, how do we do better to help us get into that door?
I'd say you need to beat the algorithm of LinkedIn. So you need to, the number one thing, if anybody listens to this podcast and they're trying to find a new job, do this thing, is that look at your LinkedIn, all your positions, your experience. Make sure that those titles for your experience directly line up to the titles that are being advertised
Mm.
widely by companies, because like companies give us weird titles. I'm a business solutions manager, but actually I'm in reality a recruiter and an account executive. So if I'm looking for a new role, I need to choose which role I'm looking for, and I need to put that role, even if that isn't really all that I did, I need to put that role into my title, or else it's not going to reflect into the pool that people are using. One, when they search into, like, let's say there's two ways that recruiters interface with LinkedIn. They either are just going on LinkedIn and searching for people that maybe used to work at a company and then going like that. They're going through Sales Navigator and searching for specific titles to find people. The best way, but the most expensive way, is they're using LinkedIn Recruiter, which only shows if somebody is available, open to work, and then anybody else that doesn't have those clicked on, it'll kind of put you in a lower category. And then if you don't have the right title, they can't see you in any of those tools. So if you're, let's say you want to be an IT director, but you put, maybe your official title was Director of Operations and Technology at that company, they're not going to see you because they're not looking for a Director of Operations. They're looking for an IT director, even if that's what your company called you. If you functioned as an IT director and you're looking for an IT director role, you need to put that in your title.
So you mentioned LinkedIn. You said something that's interesting. So LinkedIn right now, because they're premium, they're the cream of the crop to a certain degree, are they the most expensive tool to use as a recruiter?
Not now, because now there's AI tools. So like LinkedIn Recruiter has a cool, like, as when I look for like specific candidates, they have like an AI search bar, and then it'll like bring up candidates in a certain geographic area and all this kind of stuff. There's other tools now like Noon AI, like Loxo, that will do like a scan of all the resumes on Indeed, LinkedIn, all these places, and it'll like suck them all in and say, here are the top
Oh, they're
10 profiles
aggregators.
for
Oh,
this
wow.
job description, which drastically cuts down a lot of your time as a recruiter, which are really great, for filling a role. That doesn't always work, especially when you have weird roles that like have a lot of bizarre caveats to them. But this is where recruiters are also scared of AI, because they're scared like, hey, that's going to eliminate the need for my job. And theoretically, over time, that could happen, right? Because it's speeding up that process so much that you could have one really good recruiter, instead of working three jobs, they could work six jobs or five jobs at once, without having a
But
lot of.
what's interesting about that AI tool is if you can figure out the LLM in the back and not smart that, you can bubble yourself up, right? I
That's
mean,
the
I don't
other.
know. I wonder about that on there because, there's, I don't know. I kind of feel that way because I think the human, but the other problem you have is people do what you've said in earlier discussion where people are filling, stuff in and you go ask them about it. Like, well, hang on. I put it in there just because like, that there's a recruiter that called me that had a contract job. Can you just update your resume just to say you've actually done that? I said, no, I haven't done it. I was a manager. I wasn't an engineer, right? But just put that in there and hoping
Straight
that you
up.
can,
Yeah,
yeah, it's just,
suspect. So that's pretty bad. You never want to. I never in a million years will tell a candidate, yeah, just put that stuff in your resume so it can be there, because that you'll just look terrible to a
yeah.
client, and it's just shady. Now, I will say, like, there are a lot of people, especially in IT and software engineering and data engineering or analytics, they kind of like undersell themselves. And I'm like, I need you to like really make yourself stand out here. Don't diminuate. If you've
Well, let's talk about that. Most people in IT are very detail oriented, I think. Most people that are trying to get a job, right? What is a good mix for me? Because like I had my, and I think I mentioned that to you. I got rid of a lot of, I've been working for a while, and so I took my resume and then I spent a little bit more time kind of providing more detail. But then people say it's you don't. But and then I heard Jess say, people are you're not gonna spend a whole, hour looking at each resume, right? So what's the good? What do you think is a good mix? How much detail should I put in there?
That's a great question. I mean, I'd say enough where it's clear you're showing like your personal impact on each role that you did and like your core accomplishments, like with actual tangible numbers or, like mainly quantitative goals and timelines and dates and things like that are great. That's digestible. When I look at it, I could read the whole thing from top to bottom in about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. Because if this is the one thing I see a lot of IT people and especially software engineers do, they'll just be like, skills section, and it'll be like
1,000 things.
70
Yeah.
different programming languages and tools. And I'm like, dear God, no. Like, it's like half, like a quarter of the page is just, and it's like 10-point font, like to get into the ATS. I'm like, when I see that resume, I'm like, I'm not sending this to my client. Like, this is like aggressive, right? I'm just like, but to be fair, I understand why they're doing it because they want the ATS to pick up these different things and these tool sets. But I'm like, once you're going in to talk with a client, like an actual hiring manager, switch up, like try and clean it up a little. Like just try and take the 5 minutes to delete out the stuff that's not applicable once you're in the interview process. Or if you're working with a recruiter, like we do this all the time, we're like, we're going to need to like clean up, like even if you've done all this stuff, we need this to just look better because the recruiters, or usually it's like we work with recruiters, non-technical recruiters and HR managers who don't understand, and they're looking for keywords. Okay, cool, this person looks great. We already know they're great. When they talk with the hiring manager would love to hear about all the different applicable things to the role. And I apologize. I know I'm just trying to think of the best way. I would say
Yeah, I
generally,
think to summarize, I think you have a good point. I mean, that's the thing that sucks right now is that, if you're not getting your head in there, I think you have to go back and retool your resume because the stupid ATS systems are picking you, throwing you out because you don't
yeah,
meet the qualifications. And so I think what you're saying is that it's okay to have a 3-page resume for the ATS, but then you need to take that resume when you're ready, when you get that next round of first round interviews to be able to clean that up and be able to present that
yeah.
on there.
And like I know the ATS for like my own personal experience, they're running calculations. Okay, like this role requires 5 years of experience doing this. So you literally need to like court like the ATSs are better than they were, but it's still like an ATS. I think we use Amplify. We just see every single person that's in there. And most ATSs, there's not really, this is surprising, but there's not a huge ability to actually like search or like break down the different things in there. And that's what some of these new AI tools are trying to do. So when you have 600 resumes in your ATS, like you have 600 resumes in your ATS that you need to go through unless it's has some way scraped the data, and a lot of times they don't, and that's really surprising to me in 2025. That's actually a wide across the board problem.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because I think you're right. The ATSs are going to be able to use your date ranges to figure out the experience level, so that it helps kind of whittle you down, right? If you don't meet that 10-year, 5-year, whatever that is on there. Do you see the eight? So let me ask you a kind of a weird question. So because of the job market, people like myself are looking at opportunities, lower opportunities, because it just to get even a bite, right? So do ATSs also say, hey, hang on, we needed only 4 years of experience, you have 20, see you later?
Yes. Yeah, that can happen. Every tool is different, and to be honest, a lot of the times you're getting filtered out is by some non-technical recruiter, or not even recruiter, like HR coordinator, who's just like looking at resumes and says like, "Oh, okay, I mean, I see 10 years of experience. This is too much. This hiring manager asked for 3 to 5, so they're literally just looking for 3 to 5." I mean, I've kind of seen it all, even with only a couple years under my belt. So it's like, I would say too, like, if you're very, like, you can almost like totally rewrite your resume to get any role. And if you have a talk track as to why, like, or if you want a different kind of role, like, you just have to rewrite your resume to go towards that experience. Even I had a friend that was a cop, and he was trying to go back to the police academy, but he wanted to be a security guard in the meantime. And then he's like, I'm not having any success getting jobs. Like, what's going on? I'm like, show me your resume. And his resume said, looking for opportunity to get into a good police department, da 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 da. I'm like, of course they're not going to hire you, because they're basically, you're saying that I'm going to bounce as soon as I get a job, as soon as I get another police, I get like out of the academy, I'm going to bounce or something. And I was like, that doesn't, if you're an employer, you look at that and say, well, that's not a good story. I'm not investing in that story. So I'm always glad to, I mean, I guess maybe as a wrapping up point, anybody that's watching this, I'm glad to like have discussions with people, give them my 2 cents on things, and I'll be putting out more content over time, because I think this stuff is more helpful to people than some of the other content I've put out, in the past. I've kind of also have a more logical stream, having more experience under it, to say like what works, what doesn't work. But partnering with a good recruiter that have known over time, finding people that work in your specific niche, because there's people that concentrate on every niche. I do mainly core IT, infrastructure operations, applications, software engineering, data and analytics, and then cybersecurity. And I stay in those 4 core buckets, and I don't really venture out. Sometimes I do firmware. Sometimes I've done like specialized like product engineering roles around hardware, but like I stay kind of in that niche, just because I'm more knowledgeable. I have a way better network in the space. So whatever you're looking for, I try and identify recruiters that are in that kind of like niche. Like, and even within those niches, I know recruiters from my old role that all they did was infrastructure operations, like level 1 help desk to IT support engineer, and that's all they did. And they wouldn't touch anything else, but they knew, and also in a specific geographic area. Like, I knew one guy, I swear he knew every level 1 to 3 help desk that was in a commutable distance of Oakland, for sure, like in the Bay Area. I just knew for a fact if I needed one of those people, he would know. He would be able to find somebody like the snap of his fingers. Yeah.
No, I think I was going to mention that I think it's interesting too. I used to get all excited when I got more people looking at me on LinkedIn, and what I found is that don't worry about that. Focus. I think it's like you said. It's nice when you can find a recruiter that's out helping you and looking out for you. I think the other part that's important, that I think you've done a really good job with me, is that I think don't forget about your contacts in there. Keep them, ping people, see how you're doing, how's life, even that is enough from a recruiting perspective to make sure, we're moving along, right? Hey, we may not need any help. I mean, you may need some help, but nobody's reaching out to you. It's an interesting world today. I know when things, I mean, it because, a lot better, because you and I have talked for the last year, but, in today's society, I think in today's economic, the job market, you don't get as many recruiters going back to you. I mean, because there isn't not much to talk about, and that's the saddest part of this. I ping a lot of my friends, and that I think they can get me a job, but you get nothing back. It's empty hello. And you're like, I know people go on LinkedIn and check stuff. At least give me the time of day. Sorry, nothing. Say something to me.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. Like there's been times too where I'm like, people reach out to me like fifth, sixth time. I'm like, look, I'm sorry. Like I always try and do my best to respond to everybody, but it's kind of tough when, yeah, it just like because you start to feel bad,
Yeah.
like or yeah, I have those people in my network that aren't necessarily looking for what I do, and then I'm like, or I've talked to people and then they follow up with me and then I'm like, sorry, I don't have anything. Cause like there's been some niches in particular that are just dead now, like Java developers, just dead, like dead, 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 dead. Like no one's asking for Java developers anymore. Like if you're a Java developer, I'm sorry if you're listening to this. Like, you need to become a full stack developer
Yeah,
yesterday,
that's
and then
true.
you need
That's
to
true
become
because
an
people, they don't want one siloed person doing work for
or
them.
Python. But it's sad because like I had people that 3 years ago there were clients that asked for a Java or Python developer, and now I'm like,
Yeah, you got to
there's
be full
like,
stack. Yeah.
yeah, if you're not a AI full stack developer yesterday, it's kind of tough to break through the crowd. And
Yeah. One thing I was going to mention to you, what I've also noticed is, if I'm not mistaken, I think where the economy is and where the job market is, that in certain roles, IT management role, they've consolidated a lot more risk management into these roles. Have you seen more of that? I seem to feel like they've done more than a traditional IT manager, IT management role, where they're expecting the IT teams to be that and I don't mind it. It's just that the problem I have with that is that that's not been traditional what I've been doing, right? They parse that off to kind of the security group by themselves doing it, and then you're facilitating to make sure that you follow the process versus being, you know, putting together the processes. Unfortunately, if you did both, you bought the equipment, you installed the hardware and the software, how do you remove yourself from a conflict, because the whole stack, right? Kind of thing. So you seeing more of that? I feel like there's more of that happening.
I feel like there's a lot more of that. And also, businesses, just like a raw business standpoint, is they look at IT as a cost center, right? And so, most IT directors that I deal with and IT managers, they're one to like 5-man shows. So it's like themselves and then maybe maybe three other people. And these are like fairly large companies like Duraflame, large construction companies. Um, I mean, in some cases, like I'm talking companies with like 5,000 plus employees. The entire IT structure is like 10 to 20 people, like from top to bottom, including PMOs and stuff like that. So I've seen them just compressing over time, and their
Yeah.
expectation of what people do is a lot more. But then they're also dealing with a lot more vendors because they want to offload risk. So they're saying like, okay, we don't have a security team, so now we have this security software and we have this security compliance consulting firm, and we don't do
MSPs are
we
more,
don't do
yeah.
asset management, so now we've outsourced asset management to this company, and so now we have a level 1 help desk that works with that company to deal with that. And then you know what I mean, like they're trying to outsource as many functions in IT as they can, and then the expectation kind of is increasing on the people that's there, and this is kind of just my view, and I've seen this kind of develop over the past 3 years for sure. It's not been a reversing trend, and even there was one client I used to have, this winery, um, and then they just one day they looked at it, they said, yeah, we're spending too much money on this. They axed, I think they had like 8 people, fired them all, outsourced to an MSP, and they're like, okay, we're done. So that's when that cost
Yeah,
structure becomes
yeah,
too big.
and that's what I was doing more of, and I did that a little bit differently. I did most of the work, and then I managed. I had
Yeah.
consultants that I paid by the hour, and that's a trend that you're right. I don't see that changing, but I wish that uh, it would be interesting for you to see if you can get roundtables of these, doing workshops or discussions on some of these things that are being consolidated. How can you get those people involved and talk about their journey? Because I did some of that myself. moving in the cloud was good, right? Because you're not, people, it's more mature, right? I mean, everywhere you look, the cloud journey is a lot easier than it was 10 years ago, and it makes sense. And it used to be, well, yeah, hang on, I don't think I trust my data or my applications in the cloud. I don't know when they're going to go belly up. But nowadays, you're
Mm-hmm.
not, if you're not, not looking at a SaaS-based application, it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah. That's actually a really good idea. So that could be a good, because I know a lot of people that could probably speak more intelligently to this, but like where I was kind of hinting at is that MSPs and IT vendors, like software vendors, service vendors, not just traditional MSPs, are growing. I have a lot of orders with MSPs for like, heads of PMOs basically because they're running multiple client projects, IT, normal IT, high level service desk, support engineers, network engineers, project managers. So MSPs are actually growing because people are trying to outsource their risk. So IT is not going away because you cannot like AI, and we don't have iRobot yet where you can send a robot to like go set up a wireless router or something at your office. So it's like I see MSPs growing and I see like IT as being more like those outside vendors. They are a growing part of IT because internal IT is not things they customers want things on demand and they don't want cost centers. And that's like the pressure on them is growing, and as the pressure on them grows, they say, okay, well, I'm going to outsource this function, and that in turn grows the business of MSPs, and that's not been changing. That's actually been an increase.
I totally agree, and I think it's interesting. And I think there should be, I think your next podcast we should talk a little bit about that because the beauty of nowadays, with SaaS applications is that the ability to roll out a SaaS application is a lot quicker than trying to, run your own application, install a bunch of clients on there. So, and these SaaS applications, companies, not applications, SaaS tools have gotten to a point where the deployment process is pretty easy, right? It's an hour of integration, and then rollout is going to be, we'll get you a client, and your Windows shop, your Mac shop, we'll write you a quick script, and you're done, right? So I think that is true, and I think what I'm seeing a lot also is, there's always a line on these director roles where even management manager roles where they want you to be able to manage vendor relationships. And I think it'd be a good discussion for you to have. How do you become good at doing that? And I think that just comes quite honestly, unfortunately, with experience. You work enough with vendors and know, and also it'd be interesting for you to talk to these MSPs and see, how should how should you be approached and how should you try to sell that within your organization on there. So I mean, they made good topics. So if you can get an MSP to kind of talk about that, because then now you've got me as a client, and then the vendors kind of being able to discuss on how their approaches, and then be able to show
Okay.
the onboarding piece of it is in the like when working at working or migrating to various SaaS applications. I didn't believe the first one I did, and the first one I did was Druva. Druva is
Yeah.
a small company, but
Yeah.
the onboarding for that tool was phenomenal, was quick. But my back, I had a backend infrastructure. I had a VM infrastructure, so deploying their proxy on-prem was easy. Download the image, connect the image, you're done. It'd be interesting to talk through that journey with vendors, and also to show talk about people like myself, how we took that journey on there. So having an IT manager, and also a vendor that can show off what an MSP, what I don't know, there's definitely various MSPs out there, so
I have
different
a
levels, I should say.
I have a ton of people in my network. Actually, that's a great idea. So, I mean, I'll invite you along to that, but that'll be a whole nother topic. And I know multiple MSPs that I could invite on too. So, I mean, that'd actually be a really interesting little roundtable
Yeah,
topic.
I think what'd be interesting to talk to the MSPs is, people that are currently out of, or out of work in traditional IT, how can you take a risk and move them over? Because the problem is that as the IT world decreases in headcount, the MSPs are increasing in their value. So in order for you've got great assets out there, but the problem is that these traditional IT guys are looking at companies are getting nothing, right? Because guess what? They're not growing. These guys are
Yeah.
growing, right? The
Yeah.
MSP side of the house is growing. So I think I'll be interested in talk that through, and then, talking through MSPs, and, I know you're looking for, but some people don't like to be project. You made a good point. A lot of these guys that are hiring at these MSPs, they want just a project manager because you're managing more companies versus managing, users, right? You're not out there trying to manage, a user issue, but you're trying to, onboard and work with customers at a wider range.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I definitely on multiple fronts. Like I mean, I could bring in people too that have like nationwide scope into hiring, like from different, MSPs from a recruiting standpoint, from like I could get IT directors from a bunch of different industries. So I'll have to maybe we can sidebar on that another time. And I think though we've kind of gone through a bunch of different things and like gone through a bunch of things that I think are important and I'll have some videos and things for everybody over the next couple weeks that we can share out that are more bite sized, like 5 to 10 minute
Yeah,
videos of
that's a good
the
idea.
entire talk. That are probably going to be more useful, and folks in your network can look at them as well. But thank you for taking the time out, John. I
Thank
mean,
you
it's
for
been a
giving me
great,
the opportunity.
yeah, 100% anytime, and we'll talk again here soon. Okay,
Thanks. Take care, guys. Bye.
take care.